Topic 17, Jefferson versus Hamilton. You should take notes during this podcast, pause it as necessary, and listen to it as many times as you need to, as you will need them to complete future graded assignments. I recommend that you take notes in the Cornell method of note-taking as presented in podcast 3 of this course. By the end of this podcast, you should be able to identify the broad philosophical differences between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, and decide which founding father you believe was more influential in the establishment of the early republic and the nation that the United States would later become. The early history of the United States is filled with almost innumerable icons. George Washington, leader of the Continental Army and first president. Benjamin Franklin, elder statesman, inveterate inventor, and charming diplomat. And James Madison, architect of the document that would become the U.S. Constitution, are only 3 of the most famous. The starkest philosophical differences over what kind of government the new nation should adopt, however, can be found in the ideas of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. We'll devote the next few minutes to learning a bit about those differing ideals. Throughout this lecture, keep considering which founding fathers' goals eventually found greater expression in the present-day United States. We have already learned that in 1776, the 33-year-old Jefferson, a Virginian lawyer, penned the eloquent words in the Declaration of Independence. During the very early years of the Republic, during the mid-1780s, while it was still governed by the weak Articles of Confederation, Jefferson served as U.S. Minister to France. When revolution broke out in that country in 1789, Jefferson embraced its goals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, interpreting the French Revolution as the fuller expression of the American Revolution's ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When it came time to weighing in on the form that the U.S. government should take in the late 1780s and 90s, Jefferson's belief in personal liberty led him to promote a weak central government. Jefferson, like many of the founding fathers, was suspicious of a strong central government after living under the abuses of King George III during the 1760s and 1770s. Jefferson and the Democratic-Republican Party that he helped to establish in the 1790s believed that only when power rested mainly at the local level, like state governments, would individual liberties be safeguarded. As a plantation owner indebted to English banks, Jefferson and other elite Southern whites mistrusted potentially powerful financial institutions in urban centers that the Constitution might enable. On the other hand, Alexander Hamilton and founding fathers who would form the Federalist Party believed that weak central governments were the root of disorder and mob rule. Under the document that governed the U.S. from 1776 to 1787, the Articles of Confederation, the central or federal government remained unable to levy taxes or raise the standing army. The legislature also needed 9 out of 13 members to agree to pass a law. As a result, the early American economy experienced wild swings, and it was difficult to establish essential tasks of government. In 1786, a group of farmers and Revolutionary War veterans rebelled against this government to protest the fact that they had not yet received their veterans' pensions. When the Massachusetts state militia was unable to quell Shays' rebellion and it threatened to cross state lines, New York sent its own militia. The violence, as well as the underlying economic disorder that catalyzed it, and the absence of a national military, convinced leaders like New Yorker Hamilton that the U.S. needed to scrap the Articles of Confederation in favor of a governing document that created a stronger federal government. Eventually, the government envisioned by Hamilton and Madison, main architect of the Constitution, that still governs the United States today, was adopted by the states in 1788. Under the Constitution, the government of the United States has a Congress that can levy taxes, raise an army, and issue a single currency, a single chief executive called a president, all powers that were absent in the government under the Articles. Moreover, broad powers given to Congress were interpreted during the 1790s as giving it the legal authority to establish a national bank. This bank helped fulfill Hamilton's vision of establishing the United States as a fledgling industrial and economic power. Wary that individual liberties might disappear in the shadow of this strong central government, Jefferson and later Madison himself pressed the Federalists led by Hamilton for constitutional guarantees of what they viewed as essential rights. Thus was born the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. In return for their support in ratifying the main part of the Constitution, Jefferson, Madison, and the Anti-Federalists, who later would become the Democratic Republicans, succeeded in enshrining in law the freedom of the press, the right to free speech, and freedom of religion, along with many other rights Americans still hold dear to this day. Without the powerful minds of both Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, this nation and its political system would doubtlessly look very different. Who do you think was more influential in establishing the nation in 1790? Or the nation we have today? Why? Before closing out this podcast, write out the answers to each learning objective in a sentence or a paragraph now. If you find that you cannot do so, go back to the beginning of the podcast, listen and watch again, and pause it as necessary to supplement the notes you've already taken until you can easily answer all of the learning objectives above. Good luck!